Several weeks ago, these barrels labeled paint sludge were found in a residential section of Goodwater in Coosa County. State Health Department personnel sampled the contents and sent the material to a laboratory in Montgomery. According to the lab report, the barrels contain more than 50 compounds, and at least 10 of them are extremely flammable industrial solvent components. They include methane, butanol, methyl cyclopentane, cyclohexane, dimethylbutane, hexanol, ethylpentane, and benzene. Goodwater resident Ray Kelly says he was told the barrels contained paint when he received them from a Weogufka oil processing firm last year. The head of the State Health Department's Division of Solid Waste, Buddy Cox, says they're investigating to determine who's responsible for generating the waste.
At this point, it appears that the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which is a federal statute, and the State Hazardous Waste Management Act have both been violated, in that the material is a hazardous waste and should have been properly handled from the time it was generated till its ultimate disposal. And by the material being placed in Goodwater, it has not been handled in accordance with the appropriate regulations.
What sort of penalties are involved in violating these acts?
This particular law has both civil and criminal statutes, so the individuals that are responsible could face up to 10 years in jail and $25,000 a day fine for each day that the violation continues. According to Mr. Cox, the cleanup, which will take 2 days to complete, should begin next week. He says the liquids could be sent to a chemical plant in North Alabama and the rest to a secure dump site in Sumter County. Cox says they believe the waste chemicals were generated in a plant or factory in central Alabama. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
There's a system in our judicial system for appealing lower court decisions. You don't just go on the airplane, go to Washington, see the U.S. Supreme Court. So I think the governor should have followed the procedures and gone through the 11th Circuit of Appeals in Atlanta before trying to get to the Supreme Court in Washington.
The bill as it was written and passed, in our opinion, is unconstitutional, and the courts will eventually prove it to be so, we expect. It's unfortunate, and we don't know for sure, but it would be unfortunate if the governor were expending state taxpayer dollars that are so needed elsewhere to defend this bill through the courts.
Here we have a state official who's sworn to uphold not only the Alabama but the United States Constitution, saying, I don't go along with that and I want my own law and I'm going to see if I can't bypass all the normal procedures to see if I can't have my way.
Ms. Weidler says the governor is possibly being used by some religious right-wingers to get the prayer law passed. And she says since Governor James is leaving office, he has nothing to lose. Teague, Martin, and Weidler all question the governor's legal advice in sidestepping the court system, and they all agree that the bill itself is unconstitutional. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
I have attempted to make very many constructive conversations. I spent all day today working on possible definitions.
You go ahead and run this thing like the law says, and then if he doesn't like it, we take it to court.
Because the sheriff, I intend to try to do this. If you don't want to help, tell me, I will leave. We can fight it out in the county commission. We can fight.
Regulations are to become law as soon as they are passed. I didn't talk again. I don't know what.
But modify those in place rather than adopting the enabling legislation and then making the modifications as a separate article.
In other words, rewrite the...
essentially rewrite the enabling legislation, but follow it as much as possible.
So many times in the past few months. The operation of bingo games for prizes or money by certain non-profit organizations for charitable education.
It was something of an unusual sight, weaving down the road behind a police escort. The Adams Chapel School was entered in the middle of the late 1800s, and officials of the Montgomery Landmarks Foundation say it's representative of many one-room schools that used to dot the countryside. Historic District Director Mary Ann Neely says for the past 30 years, the school has belonged to Mr. Colin Hartzog of Clayton.
Well, Mr. Hartzog loved the building, and he also used the building. It was used as a storage area for his farming operation. And when he realized, I think, that it would be put to such fine use here in the district and could be enjoyed and learned from by so many people, at this point he decided that, it really should be in Montgomery.
The one-room schoolhouse joins 20 other historic buildings in the district, but it will take a lot of work before the school is open to the public.
Next week we'll begin by putting the rafters back up, putting the decking on and felt on that, and drying in the building. And then the restoration will go from there.
The restoration is expected to take several months, but with luck, school bells will ring early next year. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
For the last 4 months, the James administration has been shuffling general fund money around in order to meet the appropriations promised by the legislature for this year, and also to meet about $28 million in essentially unfunded needs for prisons, Medicaid, and other debts. Assistant State Finance Director Joe Broadwater says they've even come up with enough money to carry over in the beginning of the next fiscal year to meet the first payroll for teachers and state employees, but he says even that will require more paper shuffling. The real problem now is in next year's budget. State Budget Officer Becky Beasley says if you look at what the legislature appropriated or promised to spend next year and compare it against the expected revenues of next year, the appropriations already exceed the revenues. But Ms. Beasley is quick to point out that the revenue growth could change. So tomorrow she's expected to meet with about 18 financial advisors, state economic forecasters, and banking officials to see what they think about the growth of the revenues next year. Even in all of this, there is somewhat of a pessimistic atmosphere about the entire situation, which has prompted state finance officials to begin considering proration, possibly in both budgets. Both Ms. Beasley and Mr. Broadwater agree that the general fund is the budget beset with the largest possible overextensions and could be the budget beset with proration if it comes about. The financial economic growth outlook information and Department of Finance data will be turned over to Governor James early next week. It will then be up to the governor to decide in the next 2 weeks when, if, and in what budgets proration might be declared. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Many of these bulging, rusted barrels are labeled paint sludge, but a chemical analysis of the contents show there's more in them than just paint residue. The report details more than 50 compounds in the 55-gallon barrels. At least 10 of these chemicals are extremely flammable industrial solvent components with names like methylcyclopentane, butanol, dimethylbutane, and benzene. The head of the State Health Department's Solid Waste Division, Buddy Cox, says the waste definitely doesn't belong near homes.
Basically, there are two things that we'll look at, and the first is to get the material removed from Goodwater and taken to a duly licensed facility that is capable of handling it. And then secondly, what we will do is try to attempt to find out who put it there and the circumstances they brought it under, and then once we've done that, if necessary, we'll proceed with appropriate legal action.
According to Mr. Cox, the chemical waste will take about 2 days to be loaded and carried away. He says the cost of the cleanup will depend upon where the waste is taken, and he estimates that expense to range from $5,000 to $15,000. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
The surprise of the SEC so far this season has been Ole Miss. Steve Sloan's Rebels are 2-0 and fresh off a big upset of cross-state rival Southern Mississippi. That, says Alabama coach Bear Bryant, has him plenty concerned about the improved Rebs.
They're a year older. They have better players. They've had a year to get more of the people that Steve and his staff recruited playing. And they beat Mississippi Southern. Anybody can do that. It's a good football team.
In Oxford, the Rebels feel they finally have the team to play with Alabama. In Sloan's 4 years at Ole Miss, they failed to have a winning season. In 2 of those years, they lost big to Alabama. Sloan, a former player with the Crimson Tide and pupil of Bryant, says those games do not bring back fond memories.
That's the only thing I'd ever disagree with Alabama about. If they get you down, they go ahead and beat people pretty badly. I always felt like, even like when we were at Texas Tech, we had a really good team. We didn't necessarily try to do that. That's just a difference in philosophy. But yeah, they scored on us the last play of the game 2 years ago. I hadn't forgot that, and I've been waiting for a time we had a team good enough to do something about it.
Tonight at 10, a look at what Alabama says they'll have to do to beat that fired-up bunch of Rebels on Saturday. Reporting from Tuscaloosa, Rick Podge, WSFA TV Sports. Ole Miss's 28-19 upset win over Southern Miss last Saturday in Oxford has raised some eyebrows in Tuscaloosa. Alabama coach Bear Bryant knows the Rebels are better than a year ago, and he says Steve Sloan has thrown in so many new wrinkles that it's almost impossible to prepare for this edition of the Rebels.
Out of that moving around worried me. In a way, it shouldn't in a big way, but it takes up time, and they are more apt to make a mistake doing that too. The Dallas Cowboys do it pretty well. They've been doing it 19 years.
It's hard to prepare for because it's so many formations. You have to look at each one, and Coach Donahue, I believe he's having to work a little overtime tonight. This week, working on those formations.
Really, just moving to the ball a lot quicker, and you can tell they're just playing with a lot more intensity. And they're not worrying me, but on the other hand, I know they're better, and we got something to worry about for this week.
Steve Sloan has said all along Ole Miss is much better this season, and he's made no secret of his burning desire to beat the team he once led to 2 straight national championships as a player. But he isn't naive enough to discount the fact that this could be one of Bama's greatest teams.
We're going to play hard, and we've got a good team. But Alabama is like I was talking about earlier, we were last year, in the last 3 or 4 years, been a very average team. We've jumped now, we're better than average, but where you can jump from being middle of the road to beating top 10 people, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see.
Close to 63,000 will watch the 2 SEC rivals battle it out in Jackson. Kickoff Saturday is 1:30. Reporting from Tuscaloosa, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Had it not been for sterling defense by Atlanta left fielder Jerry Royster, Houston's win would have been more lopsided than it was. Here, Royster robbed Dickie Thon of a homer by timing his leap and reaching beyond the fence to turn a sure run into a long out. One of 2 great catches by Royster on the night, but it was one of few bright spots for the Braves. In the 5th inning, shortstop Rafael Ramirez booted Terry Poole's routine grounder. 2 runners crossed the plate. Then in the 6th, Jose Cruz hit it into the right field corner for his 9th homer of the year, 3-0 Astros. Finally in the 9th, Bill Doran drilled it to right center. Claudel Washington made a diving catch, but Danny Heap tagged up, and the Astros had a 4-0 victory.
In Los Angeles, in the Dodger first inning, Kevin Landreau doubled, and then with 2 out, Pedro Guerrero doubled to score him. 1-0 Dodgers, all the scoring of the game. The Padres threatened several times. Here in the 7th, Dusty Baker got off a great throw to Ron Say at third to turn back the Padres' threat. And then in the 9th, some great catching by the Dodgers kept the Padres at bay. Fernando Valenzuela was able to cruise to his 18th win of the season. A 1-0 shutout of San Diego. It was the Dodgers' 5th straight victory.
Therefore, yesterday, I telegraphed Miss Cook and outlined a schedule of public appearances across the state. I have invited her to appear in the facts, and I thank you for caring enough this morning to come. The voters deserve to see more of Miss Cook than just signs on pine trees. They need to know about her qualifications and obligations. The auditor's office means too much to the people of Alabama to assume that just anyone who runs for the office can automatically do the job efficiently and effectively. Industrial development and objective. With my qualifications and 13 years of proven experience in teaching, finance, industrial development, and public service, I will give the voters a clear need to know the qualifications of both candidates. Therefore, Yesterday, I telegraphed Ms. Cook and outlined a schedule of public appearances across the state. Of our qualifications and obligations. The voters deserve to see more of Ms. Cook than just signs on pine trees. They need to know.
Budweiser. Their theme is Bud is a Dud. And after looking at these statistics here and numbers and figures, and we're asking all the people who are with us are not here. Some of the black leaders. Here comes Commissioner Knight now. The selective buying campaign. And we've done this because of the figures that I wish to reveal a few of them to you. For example, their theme is Bud is a Dud. And after looking at these statistics here and numbers and figures, and we made
those of us who are in a leadership role, for us not to say something about this.
The selective buying campaign. And we've done this because of the figures that I wish to reveal a few of them to you. We're asking all of our people in our community, black-owned banks. Budweiser has placed only $6 million of their money into black financial institutions, and the total money that
give you $1,000 for this. Well, they're not just corporate heads, they're clubs and organizations that are there. That have been primarily for information purposes, so that the representatives of the organizations that are present can take information back to their, they generally work with other organizations and try to get, and the needs are growing, and somehow we have to find a way to deal with them. There are more and more people every day. They need, desperately need, some refrigeration in order to provide the food that's needed to feed these hungry people that have no jobs and no food. That's one thing. Children need shoes for school. That's another need that can be filled. Also, the Baptist Hospital and the Pilot Club is they're starting a new program in Montgomery where they're trying to provide machines in homes of indigent, elderly, ill people to connect them with help in the hospital, automatic help.
This is our 5th assembly program, and it has certainly changed since the beginning. This time, we're trying to keep pace with the change in the economy. Those of you who are
Jim did, because you indeed only be worse if you become unemployed.
Well, many of these organizations in the past have applied for and received federal money, state money, and money in Montgomery as well. And all of that, of course, either has already disappeared or by 1983 will have disappeared. So they must rely more on what's going on in Montgomery and what's available in Montgomery in order to fill these needs, in order to help a lot of people.
The group, which consisted of bankers, stockbrokers, economists, and other financial experts, was called together to help state budget planners get an idea of what the economy will be like in the years ahead. There were some differences of opinion, but most agreed that the state would be better off taking a cautious approach in spending future tax revenues. One of the problems discussed was the anticipated shortfall of revenue to the state general fund for the budget beginning in October. The general fund receives much of its money from interest on state bank deposits. When the legislature adopted the budget earlier in the year, the state was receiving record interest rates on its money. Now that interest rates are down, the money expected to go to the general fund just won't be there. Most of the panel members believe in some increase in economic activity in 1983. They think it will take longer than just a few months to get the unemployed back to work, because Alabama will lag behind the rest of the U.S. during an economic recovery. The chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Representative Walter Owens, doesn't believe the recovery will come as quickly as some may think.
Well, of course, these experts that you heard today, and I disagree. I think we're in a period of another 4 years of flat growth, and I don't think the economy is going to turn around to that extent. I think we've bottomed out, possibly, and we're going to stay there for another period of time, whereas the experts feel like we might begin to grow and come back with some recovery. But I, as a non-expert, though, and just a layman watching what's going on in the state of Alabama's economy, I don't see a lot of growing and coming back in the next 4 years.
Representative Owens says the education and general fund budgets may have to be prorated
in a
next
very
year
uneasy
because of the
position
failure of the
to begin
economy
with,
to pick
because
up
we know
as quickly as expected.
We,
Dennis
myself,
Layton
and
of
others
WSFA
who
TV
looked at
News.
the last year missed so badly.
What they call many errors disease, which is incurable once you get. I shot 397 out of 400. Did you shoot 50 yards or 25 yards? 25 yards. 25 yards. So we shoot 50 minutes. We feel very proud of this team this year, and for several different reasons, because we have used all 7 team members to shoot all year long, and we have gone, as they say in football, undefeated and untied throughout the state, regional competition, and the state championships, and now the national championships.
After sweeping a 2-game series with the Dodgers, the Braves find themselves in a tailspin. Tied 1-1 in the 5th inning, the Astros took the lead on back-to-back doubles by Heath and Doran. The Braves came back to tie against Nolan Ryan in the bottom of that inning. Benedict singled and was sacrificed to second. The hottest batter in the Braves lineup, Claudell Washington, brought him home. In the 7th, a Glenn Hubbard error kept the inning alive. Donnie Moore took over for Tommy Boggs with the bases loaded, and Dickie Thong put one near the chalk line in right to empty the bases. That gave the Astros a 5-2 lead. The final, Astros 5, Braves 4. Ryan with his 15th win. The Braves fall 2.5 games in back of the Dodgers.
3 San Diego errors in the 2nd gave the Dodgers a pair of runs. Steve Garvey grounded to 3rd. Kurt Bavacqua couldn't handle LaFay's throw at first, so Garvey ended up at 2nd. Then Bill Russell singled to right field, a ball that Broderick Perkins couldn't glove. Garvey scored. Say went to 3rd. With Bert Hooton at the plate, John Monefusco tried to pick off Bill Russell, with Say scoring, and it was 2-0 Los Angeles. In the Dodgers' half of the 3rd, Dusty Baker walked and Pedro Guerrero came up and swatted home run number 30 to left field for a 4-0 Los Angeles lead. The Dodgers scored their final run in the 6th inning when a single, a walk, and this Steve Yeager single brought home Garvey. 5-0 the final. Hooton won his 3rd game of the year, a 3-hitter for a sweep of San Diego, as the Dodgers take a 2.5-game lead over the losing Braves.
The Golden Tigers are fresh off a 13-8 win last Saturday over Savannah State. Coach Lonzo Bully says he's pleased to get the win, but he says his team still has a lot of improving to do.
Well, right now we have to improve upon our passing game offensively, and defensively we must teach our defensive back how to intercept passes, hopefully.
Tuskegee's opponent this week is Morris Brown College of Atlanta. They're 1-1 after 2 games, a record Bully says is deceiving.
They're a very good team. They're right now 1-1. They have a very outstanding quarterback in Burgess, who's 6'3", about 2'5", and he can throw with either hand. Last week they lost to Florida 27-0, but that was deceptive. I think we can do a lot of things to Morris Brown, but we must be very physical and very sound. Well, I am expecting personally a very brutal game, a very physical game. If it doesn't turn out that way, then it would shock me.
There's some evidence in the games trying to impede Southern Collegiate Athletic Conference contest. The Golden Tigers. Morris Brown won last year's contest in the closing minutes, 14-6. Kickoff at Alumni Bowl in Tuskegee, 1:30 Saturday afternoon.
Medicaid providers usually receive reimbursement checks from the state about every 2 weeks, but now they may go without a check for a month or longer. The state doesn't have the money to match with federal funds to come up with $30 million to pay back nursing homes, doctors, hospitals, and pharmacies for services and drugs they provide to Medicaid recipients. Fairview Medical Center is one of the largest Medicaid provider hospitals in the area, An official at Fairview says the delayed payment is terrible and means they'll have to make special arrangements to pay their bills. As many as 1/3 of the center's patients are on Medicaid. The owner of this pharmacy is also concerned about the delay in payments. Blake Vincent says his drugstore has a large inventory of drugs that will be hard to replace without reimbursement from the state.
Well, when we're not reimbursed on time, it makes it real hard for us to pay our bills at the end of each month. And our suppliers a lot of times don't understand these late reimbursements that we get, and a lot of time our shipment of drugs is held up and we're short some items during these periods of time.
Mr. Vincent says they'll keep sending in Medicaid forms every day for the prescriptions they fill, and hopefully they'll make it through the shortfall without having to borrow money. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
The Supreme Court ruling stems from a lawsuit filed by the Retirement Systems Board of Control. The board was challenging the so-called Bear-Bryant bill, saying it was unconstitutional because it extended Bryant a retirement privilege not extended to other retirement systems members. Attorney General Charles Graddick intervened in the suit and said the Retirement Board couldn't challenge the law because it didn't use his office. The Supreme Court ruled that the board could not challenge the law, but not because it didn't use Graddick's office, but instead because the Retirement Systems is a state agency and not a public corporation. Executive Secretary Dr. David Bronner of the Retirement System says that court ruling could have far-reaching effects. Dr. Bronner says the ruling could be interpreted to mean the Retirement Systems falls under all of the rules of state government, including a constitutional provision that prohibits the state from extending its credit to public or corporate institutions. Dr. Bronner says that could mean the retirement systems couldn't deal in stocks and bonds, the principal means it has of meeting the teacher and employee retirement benefits. Dr. Bronner says it could also mean that every stock and bond transaction the system has made since 1940 has been illegal. Dr. Bronner goes on to say that the court ruling could also mean that every penny in the retirement systems belongs to the state and not the members who contribute. Dr. Bronner says that could jeopardize the status of millions and millions of retirement systems dollars. Dr. Bronner says that the Retirement Systems intends to ask the Supreme Court early next week for an opinion on what that does to the retirement systems. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Are y'all counting them as you go? Is there a possibility that would change anytime? I don't know what I said. I meant to say you didn't get ready. Oh, no. What I meant to say here is nothing to do more than you do. This is your number. None of them in out to another end.
Monday's PSC hearing will be a first because it won't involve just one utility or one rate case. Instead, the PSC is calling in all 34 telephone companies in Alabama. The phone industry wants to change 2 accounting procedures. And dry as that sounds, if the PSC agrees, it will be a mixed bag for customers. Tom Somerville of South Central Bell says the industry needs to change the way customers are billed for inside wiring.
So it would mean, certainly for the customers in general, long-term benefits of lower rates, less pressure on your rates. It would mean for those who have the work done that they would begin paying the full cost of that work.
The industry will also argue that telephone equipment doesn't last as long as it used to. The equipment is quickly outdated.
High technology business. It's a rapidly advancing business from the standpoint of technological innovation, and it's one that's becoming more and more competitive every day.
So Somerville says telephone companies should be able to recover their equipment costs faster. He believes a new depreciation method would take some of the pressure off phone rates in the future. Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
I'm disappointed in the ruling. However, I'm not surprised. As an attorney, I realized that it's very difficult to hold somebody in contempt, and apparently the judge felt that there was not enough
I never felt like the court would give any credence to.
Most of these were, the majority of these robberies were, was 2 or 3 robberies been cleared by just sheer good detective work. It was later determined that the business had not been robbed, and 3 of the employees had stolen the money reportedly taken in the robbery. The manager, Marilyn Cooper, age 22, assistant manager, Marshall Endress, age 22, and Mark Endress, age 18, have been arrested and charged with theft of property 1st degree. They've been placed in the Montgomery County Jail. We have recovered more than $3,000 of the reported $5,000 taken.